Welcome again to It Doesn't Take a Genius, conversation with introspective perspectives and pithy points of view. Here are your hosts, my friends, Max and Marty.
I think that's Mark and Mike.
Yeah, whatever.
Ramsey!
Bonjour, Marshall. How are you today?
Oh, we got nothing but croissants. Yeah. French is not my thing. But I know that you've took a deep dive into one of the classics, literary wise. So yeah, the fact that you don't have a little thin mustache at this point and wearing a beret, I'm deeply shocked.
Right. I have a friend who said that she decided after a French film course in college that the essence of France was a woman with a poodle sitting at a cafe contemplating if she was going to kill herself. And I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know a lot about France, but I read. I'm in the process of reading with my book club. Shout out to them, Democracy in America by Alexi de Tocqueville, and it's this book written in the 1830s after he came back from sort of a tour of America, and you get the impression that he basically sidled up to every person he could. He kept them all anonymous so that they would be comfortable talking to him, and just soaked up the essence of what made America America. And he's from France, and he was an aristocrat involved in politics, and he saw some real dangers in democracy in France. And he makes a point of saying that he wrote the book in a kind of religious terror. He was really like sort of in an existential crisis about this whole democracy thing. And that's where the tour came from. And that's where the book came from after the tour. So it's a fascinating look at what makes America really unique and distinct.
Well, the first thing that I'm thinking is that if I was sitting around pondering a form of government and had questions, would I have gotten on a ship, gone to
Right.
another country, and wandered that country interviewing citizens?
Well, maybe you would have if what had been happening in your country was, the reign of terror and various, guillotine epidemics where, the people had risen up, but there was mass slaughter and violence and, just power struggles. And then over here's America relatively peacefully blossoming into this, democratic power. So I think that's what got him excited at the time. And our listeners at this point are going, why are we talking about this? This isn't a political science podcast. But I think you'll see from the quotes that I'll share today that there are real learnings for the modern organization that wants to have engaged employees. So that's why we're talking about this today.
Well, that's fantastic. So yeah, let's what can we learn from America, and what can we learn from an outsider's perspective on America?
100%. This is an outside the fishbowl view, and I've just pulled a quote here that I'm going to share little bits of. I won't read you the whole thing, but he's just doing analysis about America, and so he talks about the comparison to countries in Europe. And he says, there are some nations in Europe whose inhabitants think of themselves in a sense as colonists, indifferent to the fate of the place they live in. And that was when I sort of like my radar went up, like, boy, if you thought about that in terms of instead of inhabitants, you thought about employees, members of the organization. They're just colonists. They're not true bona fide members of the organization. They're just colonists. They're indifferent to the fate of the place they live in. They're indifferent to the fate of that company, that business, that charity, whatever the organization is. And so he goes on to sort of describe some of the things about it. Changes occur in their country without their cooperation. They're not even aware of precisely what has taken place. He says they enjoy what's going on in the organization without a sense of ownership. They never give a thought to how they might be improved. And when things go wrong, they might be so divorced from the organization, that they might just cross their arms and wait for the nation as a whole to come to their aid instead of them, having some ownership and taking over. Says they might submit to the policies of the organization of the country, but de Tocqueville says no sooner is force removed than they are glad to defy the law. They might even go in to where they're wavering between servitude and license, just this slave versus this total rebel. And then the money quote at the end, he says, in such a place, one no longer finds citizens, but only subjects. Ooh. That was the part that just sort of chilled me to the core, that, wow, there's something here. All of these little symptoms that I just described, that you don't have citizens, you have subjects, and subjects act differently than citizens. They're just not as engaged, not as plugged in, not as valuable to the organization. So that's the quote that I wanted to pull out a few things from.
Wow, that's some deep stuff, man. Yeah. The first thing I thought of was the in World War II, they were studying people's reaction to change, and there was 4 different people who showed up when you went to change something. There were victims, critics, bystanders, and navigators. So 3 of the 4 were negative. And as you're talking, I'm thinking of the bystander.
Right.
This indifference to change, this indifference to what's going around, this indifference to wanting to make a contribution. It's just this indifference, and so that's very frightening when you think about it.
Yeah, cross your arms and wait, right? Like that's all you're going to really do.
Yeah. We always talk about the bystander's favorite line is, "Lay low, this too will pass."
Right.
And whether you're talking about in a democracy, in a form of government, or you're talking about your department where you work,
right,
the same people show up.
Right, exactly. I mean, this is human nature. What we're talking about today is human nature, and so with liberty here, I pulled out 4 different things that I hear there that really speak to what you're talking about there with the World War II research. But it's sort of like, think of this as a diagnostic about your organization. How engaged do you have your people? Are they subjects or are they citizens? And you see what you think about this, Mike, but here's my list of 4 things. First off, are they indifferent to the organization's fate? Do they even give a rip if things go well for the company or not, right? Number 2, do they lack a sense of ownership? And you might see that show up as they're reactive, but they're not really proactively, figuring out things for the sake of, improving the organization. The third one is uninterested in the growth of the organization. They're happy to, make widgets, do their role, but they're not thinking about the big picture of are we as a company growing? We're just thinking about my job, my role. And then the final thing is they might even be just downright defiant of policies and processes unless forced. And by forced, it could be the pay plan. Like that's the only reason they're obeying. It could be a temporary spiff. That's the only reason that they're playing ball. It could be that you've just applied to threats to the organization. But in some form or fashion, that's the only thing keeping them from defying your policies. And maybe they're just defying them anyway. So that's my list.
No, that's a frightening list.
Yeah, it's not pleasant.
Yeah. If you're the leader of an organization, a department, a team, whatever, you just drew this continuum on, and you put citizens at one side, subjects at the other, thought through those 4 criteria, and then just made a mark on the page. Like, okay, where is my team? Where do they? Do I have my 70% subjects? 80% subjects. Am I half and half? I got some citizens and some subjects. Where am I at, and how do I move my people closer to citizen status, right? How do I get them to engage? Well, like we've talked about previously, if I'm a subject, I'm going to show up, I'm going to give you my hands, I'm going to do the minimum, I'm going to give you enough work that you don't fire me. If I'm a citizen, I'm looking for, I liked your word proactive. I'm looking for ways to contribute, to add to, and the one question that I ask is are your people laying awake at night thinking about the same thing that you, the leader, are laying awake at night thinking about? And so, yeah, how do I, I want to see this thing grow. I want to see it successful.
Yeah.
Even beyond the parts that affect me, I'm going to take pride in that. That's something that I'm fully engaged in.
I worked for an organization a few years back, and we did an exercise where everybody put on the wall sticky notes of what they wished for the organization or for their role or what have you. And I was shocked how many of them brought up things about the founder of the company. And I won't say his name, but he had passed away. And I wish Mr. Smith could still visit the store. I wish Mr. Smith were still here to see the progress. Like they were, I guess I won't say citizens, but maybe patriots. They certainly weren't mercenaries. They were thinking about the good of the organization. And there are some levers at the disposal of the team leader to get some of that buy-in. So that's where we go with this. That's the whole point of this being a podcast, is not to be gloom and doom and dissect, where are the symptoms that show you got a real problem, but there are really some opportunities here for improving.
Oh, yeah. Well, and even if you just have a handful of citizens, then, our system is we go in and go, okay, how did you create those citizens?
Yes.
And let's figure that out. And then can we replicate that with more members of your team?
That's right. And so let's move into that final area here, those things that you can do. One more quote from the book, and it's basically where he's talking about what it looks like when you have subjects. And he says part of the issue here is that in America, things were a little more decentralized, the whole thing of the federal government and the states and the towns. And it wasn't quite like that in Europe in most places. And he uses words like obedient and unenlightened, incapable to describe some of the inhabitants of these places. And so, he says that's how it is when centralized authoritarian governments get involved, kingdoms, crowns get involved. And in America, there is a federal government, but America's figured out how to do it differently. And he says, that problem of all these unenlightened citizens, he says, I deny that it's so in America, where the people are enlightened, alert to their own interests, and accustomed to thinking about them. So the American people are enlightened, alert to their own interests, and accustomed to thinking about them. And we're going to just push the political discussion right to the margins on this one, because that is not going to be something that will be healthy for us. But there are some real learnings there, again, for an employer. So those three categories are what I want to spend a little bit of time talking about, how they're each levers here. Before I go there, any thoughts from you about that?
No, I think it's the recipe. So, we were talking about, okay, you have these citizens. How did you create them? I think there's a very good chance that the three things are the key ingredients, right? Throwing a cup of enlightenment, right? we mix it all up, and lo and behold, we've got citizens. So please take us deeper into the recipe.
I so agree with what you said, and I'm going to do them in reverse order because I think that's the stickiest wicket. Let's do last. Is basically what I'm thinking. So accustomed to thinking about them. Accustomed is a way of saying you have habits. How do you get your people into a habit of engaging their thinking? Just like you said, that they lay awake at night thinking about the same things that leadership does. And so what are those things that get people in a habit of thinking about the organization, engaging their brains and thinking about the organization? On my list, Mike, regularly scheduled coaching, not fly-by-night coaching, not after the fact when there's been a problem coaching, but regular coaching sessions with your people. Doesn't have to be super formal. It just needs to be regular, where you're going to ask the right questions. Because, hey, in coaching, if I'm asking a question, I'm, knocking the ball onto your side of the net. You're the one engaging in thought now, answering that question. So regularly scheduled coaching is one way to do that. A couple others that are kind of related: cross-functional teams. You're basically inviting folks to think about other roles, other departments, other sides of the organization, and talk through how to invest in growing the organization. And they're seeing other perspectives too, right? They're thinking about things from other people's perspectives. And input gathering sessions, whatever that is. It might be the employee survey, it might be a town hall meeting, or a department meeting where the manager's sort of gathering feedback to funnel up to the top. I don't know what it looks like, but some way of getting the input of people, which again is I'm just knocking the ball across the net, asking you to address the ball. And in this case, that's a question that is asking you to think about, what would grow our organization, what would make us better for the customer, what would increase sales, whatever it is. So those are on my list of the things that get us accustomed to thinking about the organization.
Well, I love that, because in all of these systems, we're asking instead of telling. And
Right.
so if we want to give our opinion and then ask for feedback on it, that's really not asking.
Yeah.
So we're always coaching our leaders. If we're going to go into a meeting, let's make sure the hippo, the highest paid person in the organization, is the last one to speak and to share their opinion.
Yeah.
And so if you're coaching, right, we've talked about coaching, a good coaching conversation. If I'm the coach, I'm talking 20% of the time, they're talking 80% of the time. Cross-functional teams. Right. Ideally, we're facilitating a conversation. We're not sharing what it is. And if we're input gathering, just by definition, right, we're seeking that feedback. So it's almost impossible to guess what my people are thinking, but it's incredibly easy to create the environment where they will share what it is that they're accustomed to thinking about. And now we know, are they on the same page with us? Or are they, are they going on an Easter egg hunt and we have no idea where the eggs are? So
yeah, right.
That's the opportunity that affords, if you'll have the conversation.
You have to have the conversation. And again, to your point about orchestrating the environment, it's Henry Cloud that says the leaders are ridiculously in charge. You're in charge. You are the one who orchestrates the environment. That's on you. And so asking more questions, that's one way you orchestrate that environment, doing it in a format somehow. So let's talk about the second one, very much related, but notice his wording here. He says accustomed to thinking about them. So that's about the habit of thinking. And then the second is alert to their own interests. And I really want to highlight, it's easy to think about the own interests part, right? Like you got to give everybody a whiff 'em, what's in it for me? Duly noted. I think that's fair. We've got to help them make the connection on why this, change we're about to make, or the growth we want to see, or the culture we're trying to create is important to them. But alert to their own interests. They've got to somehow have their radar up. And so, what are some ways that you help them make that connection and keep that radar up where they're alert to it? There's a number of things that could be a part of this. New hire orientations, right? I'm explaining, I'm onboarding people to say, this is what we do. This is why we do it. This is how it impacts you. This is how it impacts the customer. This is why it's such a big deal for the coworker, that you do things this way. Communication from leadership. Not everybody's a Warren Buffett and gets this, once a year opportunity to write this amazing, annual report that's going to be read by everybody, and impress them about your thoughts. But hey, everybody's got some way to do this. Is it I don't know, maybe it's a newsletter, maybe it's a regular town hall debrief where, the owner's sharing from her perspective about the organization. but some regular communication where people aren't in the dark. Scoreboards, tracking, not just the team goals, but their impact on things. And then the pay plans can reflect proactive behavior as well. So that's my list. I don't know what you would add to that.
No, I like that. So alert to, aware of, and so often we find that if the team member is trying to better themselves and take advantage of the opportunities that are within the organization, then the organization benefits from that, that proactive growth. So yeah, if I'm alert to the opportunity to to grow and learn and become a manager,
right,
that's awesome.
Yeah, I think that's it. And again, to your point, we didn't say bright spots, but that's sort of what we've been hinting at. You've already got some people bought in. They're the bright spots. What did you do to create them? I bet things that we've talked about on this list are already a part of that pie. Well, I guess I should say already a part of that recipe. Mm-hmm. And now it's time to make it more formal and bake it into a pie that you can regularly make, periodically, every time you have new people, constantly throughout the year, as you keep people plugged in, are things that get them accustomed to thinking and alert to the interests. So those are the two big ones.
Well, I think you're spot on. And is the organization celebrating those who are alert to
yes.
their own interests?
Yes.
I have stores and organizations I work with that are very, very good about saying we promote from within. Right?
100%.
Entry-level person worked his way up. He's now general manager, with that type of thing. So they celebrate each step along the way, whether it's an idea that adds value or it's a move up in a leadership role. Right. This is a big deal, and this is something we value here.
Yeah, 100%. And that sort of all leads us to the big word that I've been avoiding. This is the stickiest wicket. The list starts with that these citizens will be enlightened. So he admits, the author himself in almost the very next paragraph says, this is an arduous enterprise. He says it would be less difficult to interest them in the details of court etiquette than in the repair of their town hall. And boy, do I see modern parallels to that. I don't think we have any problem with, getting people to learn about the latest celebrity craze, or, we could even talk about court etiquette and Prince Harry and Meghan Markle being, sort of celebrity superstars all of a sudden. And, there's intense interest there. No problem getting people to follow along on that. But how many of us could explain basic policies, political stances, even voting, voting turnout? So the same's going to have to be true for the organization, right? How many times do we find people who are good at navigating the politics? They know the internal politics. They might even be involved in drama, but not really in rolling up their sleeves and, thinking about the organization, having their heads on and alert about improving the organization. That's a harder task. So getting enlightenment here, this is hard. Notice I haven't given you any ideas yet.
No, you're just like wandering around here going, enlightenment is arduous.
Right.
Yes. Sounds like a very French thing to say. Yes. It's some arduous enlightenment over there that you're not having. Yeah. So
I think you're right.
So when you think about it, right, it's the wrong, equivalability. So I'm thinking of engagement. Where are your people highly engaged? Do they, as they say, do they bleed the company color?
Right.
And do they know why they bleed the company color? And then can they go out and advocate on behalf of the company, or the organization or the department, because they have such a deep, strong, deeply held belief in the why we do things. And so I think enlightenment, is kind of to me, a lag measure. It's what happens after you do the other few things. If I do the other things, then enlightenment is the product. An enlightened employee, an enlightened citizen is the product of doing all these other things.
So, when I see enlightenment as an image in my head, I'm seeing like a flame, that's lighting up, and I want people on fire, right? I want them that engaged that they go out and spread the word about my company and advocate for the company and so on. And it brings to mind an image from a letter that Plato supposedly written. I think we've talked about this before. We don't know for sure that he wrote it, but it's this letter describing his situation. And he starts it out basically saying, look, I've heard people are starting to teach my stuff and have written some books about it. I'm not worried. The stuff that I do can't be put into books. It can't be done that way. It has to be in a conversation with somebody. And as it were, a spark will leap from soul to soul and illuminate that person on the subject. I think that's a little bit of what's going on here. As much as this seems kind of, really around the barn, the way I'm describing this, I think what this podcast episode is really about is you're going to have conversations with your people. There's going to have to be some wrestling back and forth, even in talking about these subjects, maybe talking about the origin story, the founder's story, maybe talking about some principles of the organization or how we've done things that have really worked, listening to their input, making it a two-way street so that we gather that input and let them realize that when you are thinking about the organization and taking ownership, we love that. We want more of that. It's going to have to be some conversations. Mike, I really believe that corporate America is positioned in a way that almost no other institution in America is positioned. We all sense right now that there are a lot of things that we don't like about how the United States of America is progressing. A lot of animosity and polarization and so on. And I'm not sure that our schools, and I'm not sure that many families even have equipped us to really be able to be enlightened citizens of the government, let alone the company. And so I think there's some real work that can be done here to help people grow as individuals. And there, as you said earlier, anything that's good for them is only going to be good for us. So that's, contact me if you want to talk more about that, because if you want to talk more about that, I probably do too. I think this is a huge, huge deal to have enlightened citizens and no more subjects, no more of these folks that aren't bought in, don't take ownership in the company, let alone the country.
Well, and as the author saw in his country, the subjects eventually rose up and killed all the leaders.
Right.
So there's that. There's that unfortunate outcome of the whole leading subjects system. So yeah, we've seen that in a few countries. So just to recap, a lengthy email, a pithy tweet, a nice meme will probably not suffice in creating the cadre of enlightened citizens that you're looking to build.
I think that's spot on. So yeah, we've talked about this enough, but yeah, that the idea of, you've already probably got it in your organization. Are your people accustomed to thinking about the things that make your organization great and working for the organization, alert to their own interests, that radar up of what's going on, and enlightened, and all of this is going to take some conversation.
Fantastic, man. I like this. Lots to think about, and we're here to help.
That's right.
So yeah, get your copy of Democracy in America. Dive into it. When you get stuck, call us.
That's right.
All right, good stuff, my friend. Let's see what our pithy announcer has to say.
Let's do.
And that's a wrap. The musings of Mark and Mike. No rights reserved, etc. Feel free to share and discuss what you heard today. Even claim the ideas as your own. Who'd want to do that? See you next time on It Doesn't Take a Genius. Thanks.
That's good enough.